Hey, human rights policing class. Welcome to week 11, where we're continuing anime and urban problems. And so last week we read three articles and book excerpts on the theoretical foundations of this concept of anime. This is like the worst word in the English language. It's this sense of meaninglessness, reality disorientation, being disconnected from your community, from your society, from your family, this idea of isolation, loss of reality. It's one of the worst things that can happen. And it can happen on a structural level during times of political or economic upheaval, but it can also happen on an individual level as well. Sometimes complete, with tragic situations, divorce, death, things of that nature. And so anime is going to become, according to a lot of these classical theorists, one of the central features of modern society that leads to a lot of the social problems that we experience today, from drug addiction to crime to suicide to depression and things like that. And anime, according to some of these theories, is the defining characteristic of modernity. And I'm going to explain that in just a little bit. And so you're supposed to read in chapter 2, the classical theories, one, particularly Durkheim and the theoretical foundations of anime, including the idea of animic suicide, where really when he wrote suicide, it was the chance for sociology to get put on a map and distinguish itself from the other philosophical disciplines, where Durkheim studied one of the most personal decisions a person can make, suicide. And he explained it not from the perspective of a psychologist, but one from a historian. And so he looked at different suicide rates across time and space, across history and geography. And he found that during times of political or economic upheaval, including economic good times or bad times, suicide rates go up. And when the situation kind of metabolizes, when it starts to even out, suicide rates go down. And so during these times of political or economic upheaval, people experience a sense of anime, this sense of precariousness, of uncertainty, where the moorings get loosened and people feel disconnected from their social institutions, from their organizations, and they experience this loss of reality or reality disorientation. This disconnection, and this leads to anime, and anime leads to suicide, among many other things the Chicago School theorists are later going to argue. Then we read Community and Society for D'Antoni's, or Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then you read one of the seminal works of Robert Park and all on the growth of the city, an introduction to the research project, as well as this week, Worth's Urbanism as a Way of Life, and Louis Cantu is at the New School of Social Research, where I graduated from, and Williams Julius Wilson, who together they penned The Cost of Racial and Class Exclusion in the Inner City, and we have a discussion board based on that. So I'm just going to go over some of the readings a little bit for you. And now, and that, of course, Ferdinand Tony's Community and Society are Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, important work in sociology, published in 1887. And here we have to distinguish between two fundamental types of social organization, one in pre-modern times, one in modern times. And the pre-modern times is Gemeinschaft, community, which means community, and Gesellschaft, society. And so Gemeinschaft, community, again, this was characteristic of pre-modern times. Social relationships are characterized, close, tight-knit kind of bonds, often based on things like kinship, shared traditions, and a strong sense of solidarity. So there's a strong sense of collective consciousness that people have, and a strong sense of social cohesion, where people kind of think the same, or at least have the same kind of worldview. And so Tony sees Gemeinschaft as being, traditional, rural, pre-industrial, again, strong personal ties, strong sense of belonging to the community. And here's the sense of belonging, connection to the community. Social norms in Gemeinschaft are often informal and there's usually a mutual trust that people have and a mutual loyalty that people have with each other, rather than some type of coercive formal laws forcing people to behave in a certain manner. Rather, people kind of mutually agree to this in a Gemeinschaft type of community. Gesellschaft, on the other hand, is more characteristic of modern times after with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So it's modern, it's urban or city, and it's industrial. And social relationships tend to be um, much more impersonal, they're more contractual. And so why does, people in a Gesellschaft type of society, they follow rules because it's coercive. They listen to the boss because it's coercive and forced on them. It's not really out of loyalty or respect or anything like that. It's out of force. And it's a bureaucratic type of force. There's a bureaucratic type of social control where the state forces people to obey the boss or the rules and the laws, etc. So you don't see any loyalty, it's not trust or personal relationships. It's more impersonal, it's more bureaucratic, it's more coerced, it's more forced. In Gesellschaft, social interactions are driven by extreme rationality, self-interest, contractual agreements. It's less emotional, less shared traditions. Here you can probably see some of George Zimmel's Metropolis and Mental Life here. And Tony's argues that Gesellschaft emerges with the rise of industrial capitalism, urbanism, where people are no longer bound to tradition or community, but rather they're more independent. They're much more mobile, at least if they have a lot of money. They're much more mobile. And social relationships are transactional. In fact, that's what we live in. We live in largely a transactional type of society. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. I do this, you give me money. I don't do anything unless you pay me in some way. And so that's the type of society we have now. You only serve one particular role for me. I only see not the complete individual, but I see you as doing one role: fix my toilet, fix my elbow, teach my child, things of that nature. So it's more transactional, and that's basically how societies exist today. In fact, pretty much around the whole world. And people like Karl Marx argued that these transactional type of societies that dominates modern society today, that it leads to a lack of diversity. People become homogenous. They start to think the same, or as Herbert Marcuse calls it, they become one-dimensional types of beings. And certainly that's very characteristic of social life today. And Tony's would argue, Durkheim does the same thing, but Tony's argues that this has all to do with Zimmel would make the argument, but the rise of capitalism, industrialism, and urbanization, where things become highly rationalized in the form of an impersonal type of bureaucracy that begins to dominate social life. Weber even says that human beings are able to, they create such a rational type of society that they've trapped themselves in an iron cage that they can't get out of. And so for Tony's, the distinction between Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft highlights this shift from traditional rural and close-knit communities to modern, urban, and impersonal societies that we have today. And you pretty much have to go almost, to the Amazon or, maybe the Australian outback to find communities that are not transactionally based, that are not overly rationalistic in a sense of, and when I say rational, it's not necessarily a good thing. I'm talking about kind of the irrationality of rationality, robotic type of rationality in a form of bureaucracy or rubrics. I mean, look what happened with education. Education used to be about self-realization, self-empowerment, self-transcendence, and now it's all about, rubrics and curriculum and standards and benchmarks and objectives. Has just completely been destroyed, education. And that's because of this kind of irrationality of rationality. And so, Tony's would make an argument. Oh, and it reminds me of a story. I remember one time I was walking way in the deep Caribbean in Dominica, and I was walking in this kind of rural area, and one of the local villagers sees me walking, sees that I'm a foreigner, and starts talking to me, invites me to his village. And we're sitting there, hanging out, talking, and drinking coffee, and some little bar in the area. In this little village was basically a shack, and He said, man, before the tourists came over here, before capitalism came over here, people in our community would be proud of their skills. They would be proud of what they brought to the community, and they would work happily and for free to fix a neighbor's house or to help out a neighbor, to show their value in society, to show their loyalty, their friendship. And that's how people were rewarded. He goes, now today, not a single man here will lift a finger to help out anybody unless he gets paid first. In other words, this is a transactional type of society. Everybody gets reduced to a role. You're a simple person to perform a function. So we don't even see the complete human anymore. And that's quite apparent today in most of our social interactions with people. So we've lost a lot, I think, with the rise of industrial capital and this irrationality of rationality. Tony suggested this shift has significant implications for social cohesion, identity, individual identity, and the nature of social bonds. Basically, that social cohesion gets eroded, the society becomes divided. People are no longer connected to their community. They no longer have trust or loyalty with people. Everybody is just in this transactional based interactions, completely impersonal. And as a result, our social bonds become eradicated. Durkheim, not too different. And I've asked you to read some of the theoretical foundations. And of course, this is Durkheim and his concept of anomie. He talks about how anomie happens. And just like Ferdinand Tony, it's very simple, a very easy kind of comparison, rather, where Durkheim in his 1893, The Division of Labor in Society, he describes the different types of social cohesion that emerge in societies with different levels of complexity. And here he's talking about, just like Tony's was, mechanical or pre-modern versus modern societies. And so for Durkheim, pre-modern societies had a different, he asked a big question: what holds society together, right? And of course, the best sociologists ask that question: what holds society together? And so different things held society together during pre-modern times and modern times. And so for Durkheim, pre-modern time society was held together through what he called mechanical solidarity, which refers to a social cohesion based on similarities, a shared belief among individuals, people that share a similar worldview, a strong sense of social cohesion. Life is relatively simple. There's traditional societies. Individuals perform simple tasks. They have similar values. They share a similar collective consciousness. And so they have a strong sense of collective efficacy, a strong sense of solidarity. There's no problem with anomie. People are fully integrated and fully connected into their communities. And so social cohesion in mechanical solidarities, in societies with mechanical solidarity, arise from similarity and sameness and a strong sense of adherence to a common norm, to common values, to a common worldview. And Durkheim's examples, of course, pre-industrial societies where individuals are bound together by kinship ties, religious beliefs, and a strong sense of collective identity. And of course, with the rise of industrial capital, this was a pivotal moment in human history where we arose from the ashes of feudalism into a mercantilistic and then a capitalistic type of modern society. And so Durkheim asked, what holds society together under these conditions? Obviously something different. And so he argues that organic solidarity, in contrast, is a type of social cohesion that's more common, but yet more complex in modern societies. Social cohesion is based more on interdependence, resulting from the division of labor and specialized roles. In other words, society is held together by difference and heterogeneity. The auto mechanic, needs the pharmacist, who needs the doctor, who needs the professor, who needs the firefighter, who needs the police officer, who needs the, again, specialized. To make a plane fly, you need all kinds of people in highly specialized roles. To make a hospital work, you need a million different types of people and a million different types of highly specialized roles. And a hospital wouldn't work unless everybody brought their differences and their highly specialized skills to the table. And so, unlike mechanical solidarity, where everybody did the same thing and therefore thought the same because there's a relationship between consciousness and action, here people don't think the same way. They perform different tasks. They have highly specialized roles, and so they become very different. It's a very heterogeneous type of society. So they're not connected to a common worldview or common beliefs or traditions like they were in mechanical solidarity. In fact, all those things are lost. And so individuals are more diverse, they're more specialized in different tasks and occupations. And so, or I guess ironically, social cohesion is maintained through mutual dependence on individuals with these highly specialized skills and highly specialized contributions that they bring to the table. So Durkheim argues that organic solidarity is characteristic with industrialized and urbanized societies where the division of labor is more complex, it's more pronounced, and the individuals more and more rely on each other with their highly specialized skills for goods, services, and for cooperation. And so Durkheim's notion of mechanical and organic solidarity helps understand how social cohesion varies across societies, especially from pre-modern to modern society. Mechanical solidarity in some is based on similarities and shared values, strong collective consciousness. Organic solidarity is based on interdependence, based on this division of labor and highly specialized skills. And I would argue that these concepts are extremely important to understand the dynamics of social integration, social change, the evolution of societies from more simple to quote unquote complex forms, and how societies are held together today. But of course, the problem with the organic solidarity where people are less connected, they're less integrated, they're less feel a sense of bond or belonging to their community. This idea of anomie is always at bay. This idea of meaninglessness, of precariousness, of uncertainty, of loss of reality, that is much more pronounced in modern society than pre-modern society. And Durkheim believed that the situation was only going to get completely worse. Um, there wasn't very much hope. Maybe voluntary associations, community organizations that can reintegrate people into the community could help. But for the most part, anomie, which is the cause of all of our social problems, according to this theory anyway, will always be lurking at bay. And of course, this falls in line with George Simmel that we read in the beginning of the semester. This is Ferdinand Tönnies. This is Durkheim. All of them have written about this. And of course, some of the later theorists as well, like which had to read Lewis Worth's Urbanism and Way of Life. This was published some years later in 1938. It's another classic work in urban sociology. It explores the distinct characteristics and consequences of urban life. To some major points, I suppose. One was dense population. Worth emphasizes the concentration of people in cities. It leads to higher population density, and this density, it facilitates people being more and more anonymous, more diverse, in contrast to the kind of close-knit communities in rural areas. I've lived in New York for a very long time, hope to go back soon. And you can certainly see that, you're in a city of New Orleans, or not New Orleans, but New York, and you're in a city filled with people, yet you're alone. You're anonymous, nobody knows you. And so you're kind of free from that identity that you can't shake if you're from some small town like La Crosse. You can't really shake your identity. Everybody knows you. It's close-knit. Or sometimes there's even smaller places in even La Crosse, like some of the rural areas around here. And so in New York, you're completely anonymous. Nobody knows who you are. You can kind of put on whatever hat you want. You can be a different person every single day in New York and nobody would know. You can be a punk rocker one day. You can be a goth another day. You can be an anarchist one day. You can be a Republican another and a Trump supporter. And then you can be a Democrat. And you can be whatever, you're a communist another day. You can put on a different costume, different look, a different hat every day and be somebody, whoever you want to be. Maybe just take a subway and go a couple stops and no one will ever know. Anyway, so that's one, dense population. Two, social interaction. Urban life is characterized by a greater degree of social interaction, but these interactions are much more superficial, impersonal. How are you? How your mom and them? Just kind of, how are your children? Nobody cares what how your children are doing. Nobody cares how you are doing. It's just it's impersonal, superficial. How are you today? Nobody cares, right? But it's this kind of the superficial politeness, this superficial kinds of interactions, completely impersonal. You just kind of go through the motions of politeness, but you don't really mean anything or mean any of it. And of course, the more that you have these superficial interactions, the more you become superficial, the more you become impersonal, the more you become like a vessel. So Worth argues that this results in a weaker type of society, and it increases the type of anomie that people experience because you're less connected to people, you're less bonded, nothing seems real, everything seems superficial, disconnected, kind of cheap and worthless. and everything is just kind of commercialized. In fact, I would argue today that most people would get shocked if they see anything genuine, if they see anything that's real or true. I don't think people today even know what something genuine looks like. They don't even know what anything authentic looks like. Even the word authentic has been stolen. Authentic Mexican food, what the hell is that? Right? Authentic Cuban food, what the hell is that? And so even so any notion of being a genuine person or being, uh, have a true representation of self, all that seems to just be lost and gone in today's commercialized, superficial kind of relationships that people have, where everybody lives according to the corporate imagination on their social media accounts and absorbing themselves into commercialism and porn and social media and identity and things of that nature. And so it kind of hollows out the individual to where they become this shallow, superficial kind of non-entity in a kind of commercialized, empty culture that we live in. He also argued another important concept is cultural heterogeneity. Cities are what you would call these diverse kinds of places with many different cultures and languages and lifestyles. And Worth points out that this diversity contributes to the richness of urban life, but it also creates social fragmentation and subcultures in a city. And that certainly seems to be true as well. I remember being living in New York and being in a coffee shop, and you look around the coffee shop, especially in Astoria, Queens. It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods probably in the world. And I would look around. I'd get coffee every day after class, and I'd look around, pick a skin color, every single one of them. Pick a race, pick an ethnicity, pick a gender, pick a religion. All of them there, all the languages, all the ethnic groups, all the religious views, all right there. And so that certainly adds to the richness. I mean, that's always been my normal. Going into a place like La Crosse is almost like culture shock to me. It still is culture shock to me. I'll never get used to it. But nonetheless, that diversity is the richness of urban life, but it also leads to social fragmentation, and to various subcultures within the city, especially when you have so much exclusion, when so many people are excluded from the dominant culture. This creates type of subcultures of resistance. Another concept for specialization and differentiation. Urban societies are characterized by a high degree of specialization and division of labor. This leads to a complex social structure where individuals occupy specific roles and occupations, contributing to the overall function of the city. Here you can see a little bit of Ferdinand Tony's here with this, if you act differently, you think differently. So high degrees of specialization, high degree of division of labor is going to lead to different forms of conscience, different forms of thinking, different worldviews, which leads to more fragmentation. Individualism, Worth argues, it's concept 5. Worth argues that urban life fosters individualism and personal autonomy. The autonomy of city living allows individuals to pursue their own interests and goals without constraints of traditional social norms. Maybe if you're from La Crosse, you may not feel that. But when you grow up in a place like New York or, San Francisco or one of those major cities, or, for that matter, Shanghai, or one of the great global metropolises of the world, London, Madrid, places like that. You're no longer constrained to the bounds of tradition or to community or to social norms or expectations, what your parents want, your family wants, what your community wants. Who cares about all that? You grow up in a city, you can do whatever the hell you want. You can be whoever you want. You can spread your wings any way that you want to. There's no constraints, nobody telling you no, you just do whatever the hell you want. And so there's a certain amount of an incredible freedom that comes with urban living. I find that to be one of the most exciting things, actually. It's why I've always loved living in an urban world. I've never had any constraints, never had anybody telling me what to do. Anybody tried to tell me what to do, I just kind of laugh in their face, because I do what I want, when I want, how I want, and I pursue my own interests when I want, how I want, whenever I want. And so that's one of the things that cities afford people, as opposed to more rural kinds of areas. 6, impersonal relationships. Due to the large number of people and the transient nature of urban life, interpersonal relationships tend to be more superficial and transactional. Here we can see Ferdinand Tony's again, already explained that. And of course, when you feel hollow, everything is superficial, everything is based on the transaction. I scratch my back, you scratch yours, you pay me, I do this. et cetera, et cetera. If I do this, I get upward mobility. If I do this, this is good for my career. Everything is transactional. Everything is about upward mobility. It's about careerism. It's about you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Of course, that leads to an abundance of corruption and dishonesty that you can see everywhere, from in every aspect of our society, in every institution, including universities and government, wherever. So work suggests that this contributes to feelings of loneliness and more anomie, especially among urban dwellers. And seven, urbanism and modernity. Worth sees urbanism as synonymous with modernity and industrialization. And of course, the city is the most defining aspect of modernity. And so he argues that the rise of the city is a natural consequence of technological advancements and economic development. And that leads to profound changes in social organizations and cultural practices. So basically, Worth's essay provides kind of a more or less a comprehensive analysis of some of the distinctive features of urban life, its impact on individuals and society. It's still a foundational text in urban sociology, and it shapes our understanding of complexities of urbanization and its impact on human behavior and social relationships. And so I hope you enjoy some of those readings. You also have Louis Quicant and William Julius Wilson's The Cost of Racial and Class Exclusion in Inner City. And of course, we live in what we could call, what my friend Jock Young, the late Jock Young, called the exclusive type of society of who's in and who's out. And so obviously, people can talk about race all they want to, but talking about race and exclusion really doesn't mean much unless you add this idea of class involved. I would argue that class is the most important component of exclusion. If you go to Atlanta, you look at the Black population there, they know many of them know numerous languages, they have a bunch of degrees, they've traveled all over the world, they're beautifully, impeccably dressed, extremely high educated, extremely wealthy, they do better than most white Americans. It may not be what you see in places like La Crosse, but certainly when you venture out of places like this, that's what you'll see. And so it's important then to look at this component of class. Class becomes extremely important. Those who control and own the means of production and those who don't, those who give the orders and those who take the orders. And so that's basically class right there for you. And the vast majority of people take the orders from some type of master or Uberman or whatever, boss, whatever you want to call it. And so Kant and Wilson then talk about exclusion. They even compare, exclusion in France to the American apartheid system. And of course, race plays a much stronger role, I would argue, probably here in the United States than France. But it's an interesting read, and give it a look anyway. I've always liked the work of Louis Quicant, who's French sociologist, but has done a good job of blowing a lot of American sociologists out of the water. His critiques should be looked at carefully. And so, this concept of anomie, as I've written, is important to understand the root causes of urban problems that we experience. In fact, almost pretty much all of our urban problems can be, one could argue, and maybe even very well, that anomie is the cause of crime, of mental health, of suicide, of domestic abuse, of drinking, addiction, homelessness, at-risk youth, delinquency. All of this is a result of anomie, and anomie has to do with the structural conditions of our society. And one of the things that you're going to look at, especially with Robert Park and the evolution of the city, is the concentric zone model, where in zone 2, there's always, in Chicago, 1920s, there's always a high rate of crime. And so it doesn't matter what immigrants are moving into zone 2. Keep in mind, in American criminology at the time, crime was associated with things like the shape of your skull, your body size, things like that. In fact, today, crime is still thought of today in a very similar way, but it's now related to like the melanin in your skin, or if you have a man in the family as opposed to a woman, very sexist and racist kinds of notions that explain crime and deviant, broken family, more sexist, racist types of things to argue. But nonetheless, when we look at So that when the Chicago school theorists look at Zone 2 in Chicago in the 1920s, they were noticing that it doesn't matter what ethnic group is in Zone 2, whether it's the Poles, or the Hungarians, or the Germans, or the Irish, who were considered Celtic ape-like creatures that could never assimilate into the decency of white man's culture, or Black people or Hispanic people. Zone 2 crime rates are always high, regardless of the melanin in people's skin, regardless of their ethnicity or where they came from, or their race, or any of those things, right? Rather, it had to do with that it was a zone constantly in flux and transition, that the community did not have time to stabilize, develop a sense of social cohesion and collective solidarity, forming bonds where community organizations can work together with community residents and connecting and integrating people into the community with a strong sense, again, of social cohesion, of solidarity, of connection. Those things didn't take time to form because it was a zone of transition, the neighbors constantly in flux. And these structural conditions are what creates anomie, and anomie is what causes social problems like crime. So if you want to eliminate crime, you don't need cops and you don't need cages. You don't need cops or their cages or their awful lawyers and judges. What you need is to lessen the conditions of anomie. And so you have to change the structural conditions that create anomie in a certain area. And if you can make those type of structural changes that lessen the conditions of anomie that lead to crime, then you can eliminate or ameliorate the problem of crime without putting people in chains and then dragging them to their cages, which is a very barbaric, uncivilized act, in my view. And so very powerful readings. I think it has a lot to say about a whole theory of crime. And the good thing is that once you understand the root causes of crime and you understand that it's anomie, you can actually propose policy changes to reduce anomie in our society and therefore lessen or ameliorate the social problems that create human suffering. If sociology can't solve the problem of human suffering, then sociology is worthless. Okay, so enjoy that, your discussion board. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Yep. Like I've been doing, you have 4 parts of the discussion board, but I limit how much you have to talk on each one of those. You have to pick 3 out of those 4, and then even of the 3 you have to pick, you only have to choose certain items to talk about in each one. So just read the discussion board carefully. The instructions are very very detailed and easy to understand. And so I try to create some interesting questions based upon those readings to make you really think and understand this idea of anomie, which I think is and I say this without any hubris or without any exaggeration, I think the concept of anomie is the most important concept in the world today to understand human suffering. And so understand anomie, its theoretical roots, how it's been applied, what it exactly means, and how it happened. If you do that, you will understand the root causes of many of the problems that plague human societies today. And once you understand the problems that plague human society and understand how it's based on anomie, you can actually solve them. At least you have the potential to. So take it seriously. Okay, so for next week, it's a project that I think that you'll really like. You're basically writing a La Crosse City tourism guide project. But I'll tell you what, if you watch this video, I'm probably not going to send an email, but if you watch this video all the way through, you don't have to do La Crosse as your tourism guide project. You can pick any city that you really like, that you've been to. I mean, you have to have been there, or at least know it. And so I ask you to write basically a tourism guide like you would find in like Lonely Planet. And one of the books that I'm writing right now on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, I'm almost finished the book. It's going to be getting published. I actually write at the end of the chapters, at the end of some of the chapters on my case studies, I actually write a tourist guide for the reader. And so it was actually really kind of a kick in the ass for me to do. I really enjoyed it. And so I thought that y'all would enjoy it too. So I gave the instructions on like basically how I did it. And so you can do it like that too. So you have, again, it's called assignment for La Crosse City Tourism Guide Project. Again, you can pick whatever city you want. Just make sure that you're familiar with it. Otherwise, no good. So pick any city that you're familiar with, that you've been to. And so you'll introduce the city. Just make sure you read the instructions. You'll have sections and highlights, divide your tourism guide into sections, highlighting each specific aspect of the city that you're interested, historical landmarks, cultural events, outdoor activities, dining, entertainment. Choose at least 5 key highlights for each section. Make sure you do some research and information gathering on it. What makes it a distinctive, what makes it a popular destination or an interesting destination, upcoming events, unique offerings that the city has as a distinctive travel destination, practical details like location, addresses, contact information, operating hours of places, mission fees, things like that, museums or whatever. Make sure it's up to date and accurate information. Provide a visual element. Use a literary device, a visual text to make your text spring to life. Share interesting stories, historical significance, cultural nuances, things of that nature. Also about local cuisine and dining recommendations. I'm not sure if there's, I guess there's probably some in La Crosse. Not that I would eat in any of them, but nonetheless, whatever city you choose, pick local cuisine, dining options. You may even have something for vegetarians and vegans, who knows, or recommended popular restaurants, cafes, eateries, whatever. Travel tips and recommendations, interactive features, and promotional events, things of that nature. So I think you really enjoy that. That's what we're doing all next week. So I've no reading or anything, just do this tourist guide. I think you're really gonna like it. I enjoyed it doing it myself. All the things I've asked you to do, I've done myself, and this is one of the most entertaining and enjoyable ones that I did. So I thoroughly hope you enjoy it. Other than that, been a great class so far. Keep up the great work, and email for anything that you need, and keep it going strong, y'all. Thank you.